get a little lost. My compass starts going woo 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 woo. Like, I don't know where we are.
It just matches your foot. I don't know what else we want to do. Any update on you, kid?
No.
No scheduled.
No.
Okay.
I gotta wear the boot till the end of the month, I guess.
Okay.
You're talking about the Southern and the Yankees in Israel.
Yeah.
Not
I
the
call
Southern,
them Southern.
not the Southern belief here in the United States. The Yankees
No,
belief
it's
here.
just the J tradition versus the E tradition. The J tradition
I'm going to sit right up there so I can look at
is
it.
Southern. It's the oldest.
Why would you want to be that close to him?
Part of the way that it gets separated is that after Solomon's death,
Good luck
his
with that.
boys fought over who was going to take over his reign, and there were one of his sons that basically rebelled against the natural heir to Solomon, and so they established the northern kingdom, and then the southern kingdom was made up of two tribes, Judah and Benjamin.
Right.
And then the other 10 tribes made up the northern kingdom with a capital city in Samaria. But the northern kingdom fell in 722 and was no longer a kingdom of any repute. There was some riffraff that was left behind that irritated the southern kingdom. But then the southern kingdom doesn't get destroyed for 200 years until 497 BC. And that's when they're taken off into captivity.
Okay, well, I've got it straight now. When you say Yankee, I'm thinking New York.
No. I need to quit doing that. Yeah, the Northern Kingdom versus Southern Kingdom have two oral traditions that were repeated and shared with their families, and finally in captivity, when they developed writing skills as over against just clay tablets, they began to codify that oral tradition in what has become known to us as the Old Testament. And it's a beautiful story. There's a Samaritan Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible. There is a Samaritan version of that, which would be Northern Kingdom. It's much shorter than the what we call the Masoretic text, which is the Southern Kingdom, or the generalized accepted recording of the first 5 books of the Bible, plus all the others that were added to it. But and then you have the Septuagint, which is a translation of the Old Testament into Greek in northern Egypt in the century, I think, before Christ, following, I think, maybe even a century after Christ, where the Hebrew-speaking rabbis in Egypt, which was increasingly becoming Greek-speaking, needed to have the Bible in their tongue, and so they translated their version of the Masoretic text, or the Old Testament as we know it, into Greek.
With their interpretation.
Well, yeah, it's actually, scholars will consult the Septuagint because sometimes there's a Hebrew word that we really don't know for sure exactly what it says. And so they will look at the Septuagint, they'll look at the Samaritan Pentateuch, which was first 5 books of the Old Testament, and they'll kind of come to a consensus. So it helps. It was done by 70 scholars. That's where you get the Septuagint from. And in biblical studies, it is symbolized by the Roman numerals LXX, and that's the Septuagint, and that's the Greek translation of the Masoretic text about 200 years after the Masoretic text was formed in Persia and Babylon. Came back. Ezra is known as the scribe of Israel, first designate, title that we ever see that name. And the scribe is the one. They were the Xerox machines of the first and second centuries. They were men. They're called scribes or lawyers if you're in Luke's gospel, and they're the ones who basically spent their life sitting in a room listening to a rabbi read the Masoretic text very slowly, and they would recopy it by hand. And it was a tedious thing, and they did a great job. We have examples of Masoretic texts that date near the birth of the time of Christ, and then we have some more completed versions that come like 1,000, 1,500 years AD, and you compare them side by side, and it's almost like the Xerox machine did its work. There's just no discrepancies, very minimal discrepancies, and it's just really an amazing kind of evaluation that scholars do with that. Okay, I've been chasing rabbits. I've asked for apologies or forgiveness of that. And I won't even tell you that Bill's the one who's asking the questions. I just love chasing them. So
But my question was real short. The answer was.
yes, and I ain't even got there yet, Bill. So I'm not sure what to do.
Now I'm
with it.
confused.
Now you got Jack. Yeah, I was just chasing a rabbit all the way down through the sentence that way. Prayer concerns. We're continuing to remember Rochelle. Gwen is doing well. She stayed home tonight because it's cold, but she's been out, and they seem to arrange that. It was an anomaly biologically that happened to her. She remembers this happening when she was 10 years of age. Scary. It was very painful, including a migraine headache and aches, and just, she thought she was, she went to the emergency room, didn't even come and teach Sunday school, and so it was scary for her. But they gave her lots of different kinds of things, and she's doing well. And I think, because I know that we have a Journey to Damascus Women's team meeting this Saturday, and Gwen's at the hospital all day and can't make the meeting, so she's doing well.
You're talking about Gwen?
Yes. Yeah, Gwen's doing well. Vicky's on her last breath, and
Oh my goodness.
after she went through what she did, and she's here tonight of all
Amen.
miracles,
She's here.
and really minimal pain. And do you sense any lightness or more viability with your heart or breathing or?
Breathing is better.
Okay,
Good.
okay.
Good.
Is much better.
But you've got the energy and you're
Yes.
gung ho, and
I feel great.
so the stent worked and no
Yes.
open heart surgery or anything. But
Thank God.
yeah, we're still very much praying for that. I did get a call from Becky Pena, who's having eye surgery. They're going in and cauterizing some of the back of one of her eyes. There's some bleeding. They'll stop that, and then they'll do the other eye to try to rescue what is happening there. So those are some of our church family that we've been remembering. Patty York continues to have up and down days, but she hadn't missed a Sunday. Something about coming to Sunday, she's ready to just chew me alive, and so she just, that gets her venom going. She's ready to come, and I just love seeing her, so we're praying for her. And Linda goes back at the end, in 3 months. So it's like early
Something like
part
that,
of
yeah.
April, I think. It's before Kairos is the same weekend as my men's walk to Emmaus, and it's 2 weeks before that she goes back to have radiation, a CT scan to see if what she went through last week, which was a series 4 days of focused radiation treatment on the 2 spots. I thought there were 4, there were 2 spots, and she'll go back and have it evaluated to make sure that it's working and that she's doing well. I saw Joy Kramer, and she is in good spirits, but again, my feeling is from talking with the daughters is that they're kind of looking at moving into assisted living some way. Don is weak. He cannot really do much to manage, and so they really need that kind of help. And so just pray for that. That's a hard transition for them to make. Val's mom, Dolores, continues to do well as of Sunday. I appreciated Val being here. She did come, and she had a room full, and she survived it. And that is just really neat, but we want to pray for her and for Beth.
And well, I text Val, and she has a headache the size of Texas. She said.
Oh my goodness.
She said today was a trying day at work.
Because she had to go to work and everything.
Yeah, but the headache came because of work.
Oh, okay.
And
It's
probably
didn't
the
take it
drop
to
in the
work.
barometric pressure.
It came
It
home
happened
with her.
because it came home with her from work. So, oh my gosh.
She's just cold and has a headache, and she's
Yeah.
home now.
Yeah. Okay. That's so sad. When y'all see Val in my behalf, you just say to her something like, Billy wanted me to ask you, are you registered yet? So you can be really sweet and just ask her that question. I am pushing that girl. She is so gifted and so talented and has such a heart for children. I want her to get her education. I want her to be the best gift God can make of her. And it's hard for her to make that commitment because, she's in a stable situation teaching at it's not a Montessori, but a Christian day school or something.
It's like a preschool
Private.
kindergarten.
Yeah, it's a private school, but I just really,
But she doesn't get to maximize her potential
No.
there,
yeah.
and she would get to do the same thing if she has her
Oh, yeah.
certification and make double what she's making.
Oh, yeah.
And have
Well, I
paid,
just think she'd get there and
paid
maybe
holidays and
maybe even find out that she would be gifted to be one of those very special children's therapists or something like that, like Judy and Lori
Does-
are in our
Does she
church
have
family.
a
So,
degree and needs certification or needs to
no,
finish
she needs
school?
to finish school.
yeah,
Okay.
she's got some
She
school,
started school but
but
hasn't finished.
she's just kind of, it's so easy as a single adult to say, I'm putting food on the table and I need to take care of my mom and I just, I don't really need to do this. And it could be hard for her because she still need to work and try to get that done. So,
With as many teachers that are exiting,
Oh, I know.
they're given
Oh,
grants
yeah.
for women to go back
Yeah.
to school and become teachers, not
Yeah,
just
they'll
women,
help.
but
I mean, they're
Yeah.
the same old programs and financial things
Well,
are
it's
there.
a different world right now.
I know.
Yeah. Oh, it's tough to
Teachers
be a
are
teacher.
going to work and getting shot.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a tough world, and all the paperwork and everything else.
Yeah.
We're gonna figure that out. We really are. Owen Davis, I want to continue to pray for him. Any word from Gary this week?
I saw him Tuesday.
Oh, sweet thing.
Same old, as he says, same old, same old.
Same old, same old.
Yeah,
Okay. Well,
he's
that's
doing-
better
he
than
was
nothing.
doing good.
Okay. And we pray for him. Roy Baldwin, Diane and Roy are Joanne's daughter and son-in-law, and dealing with consequences of stroke, but they're frozen in. They live in Fort Worth, so they can skate wherever they want to go, but they don't drive. So we just pray for their safety. But he's still at home, maybe facing a need to go to a rehab
Yeah,
situation.
I don't know yet.
Okay.
Val says her ears are burning.
Yes.
Oh, how funny.
Lots of other stuff too, Val. And Gwen says she's going to be watching too, so I don't know. I've already shared with you how Gwen is doing. Robert Cockrell had some very successful surgery. They didn't have to go too deep, but they finally got a clean feel on his two spots, cancer spots. And he was in good spirits when I talked to him, so we pray for him. Rhonda Klotz, what's happening with you in your heart, and your shoulder, and your arm?
Nothing yet.
Still
I'm
hurts?
waiting on the surgeon to call me.
Okay.
I'm
So
waiting
you don't know
on
what they're going to do?
No
You
idea.
took x-rays though, right, or an MRI?
Did both.
Okay, but you don't have any report on that yet. Okay. We gotta remember her, that's just not a good place for her to be. Jim Borg's daughter, they did see her last Friday in the hospital in San Antonio. She has terminal cancer, it's her youngest daughter, and that always is very, very painful for a family to face. But we want to pray for Jim Borg and Barbara. Also have Marion White. I think he's in a rehab situation, and I don't remember if Esplanade, I think somebody said. I'm gonna try and track him down because that's where Joy Kramer is. Vita Branco and Sandra Pratt and Francis Quinn or others, our acquaintance and orb of friends that we've been remembering. Got a long text from about my nephew, and Michael took his last chemo. There's every evidence to believe that this has worked and that he will be declared cancer remitted. But his last treatment really threw his body into very deep distress. I mean, fortunately he was in the hospital. He had trouble breathing, heart palpitation, just every exhibited form of, like he was massively allergic to maybe the chemo they gave him or something. And fortunately, he was in the hospital and they shot him full of all kinds of adrenaline and sent him home with steroids, and he's doing okay, but it was a scary moment for him. But all the past results of the evaluation is that the cancer treatment has worked on him, and we just continue to thank God, and they're very thankful for our prayers for them. So we just have those other needs that
I have a skin cancer on my arm.
Yeah.
It's already been biopsied.
It is skin cancer, and you're going to have it surgically removed.
March the 1st.
When?
March the
March
1st.
the 1st.
You won't have an arm by then, it'll fall off.
I hope not.
March the 1st.
March the 1st.
That's not a major surgery, but they
That's,
just want you to worry about it until March
Yeah.
the 1st.
she is so backed up.
Okay.
So, yeah, she would get to it, but she is so backed up.
Okay. And you
It's
don't want to go to
Beverly Hills.
somebody else.
It's Beverly Hills.
Okay.
So,
You don't want to go to anybody else, do
she
you?
has sent me to one other one. I thought if I can get in with him without a referral.
Okay.
I've been his patient before.
Okay. All right, Polly. You better.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you answer to me and God. And I don't know which one's going to be tougher on you. Okay. Yeah.
No,
Just-
I'll get it taken care
Okay.
of.
And every week I remember Shane's mom and that situation, and that's just a burden for you to carry. And just waiting for God to open up the possibility of selling the house and getting her settled, and the home down here that just, oh my goodness, everything that goes haywire. So prayers are with you, Shane, and with your mom. We are. Just, you know.
My it was ex uncle-in-law, I guess you could say. But anyway, he passed away night before last, and he was a great uncle to my kids, and it was a little bit more than that, you know. Like Reese probably revered him more like a grandfather than he did. You know, he didn't get to spend a lot of time with his grandfather. And, neither
So
did
it's
my
really
daughter.
close to the kids, and that's really.
And you know, for me too, like
Yeah.
he was the one who was very observant when I was still married to his nephew. He was like, I'll give you $10,000 and help you relocate if you want to leave him.
Wow.
Yeah, he was just very,
One of those
Big
perceptive
heart.
people with a big heart and transparent soul that just God used
yeah.
to bring courage to somebody who didn't have backbone to do what she needed to do.
It was,
Yeah,
was
how
tough.
sweet a story.
yeah, he
Wow.
did stuff like that all the time for people.
But passed away this week, or
Not before last
Not
at
before
4 a.m. and he just, like, I remained close to them until about 3 years ago, just because, you know, it was crazy here and so
Yeah.
far away. They're up near Weatherford,
okay,
and just breaking my heart too.
yeah, okay, thank you. We're just gonna call him your uncle.
Yeah,
Not
that's
a-
what he is.
your
I still
former
called
uncle,
him
he's
Uncle
still
David and
yeah.
Aunt Donna.
Passed away. And that reminded me of a dear friend of mine, Dr. Avalos, Sergio Avalos, lost his wife, obituaries in today's paper, and he has cared for her at home for 15 years, I bet, and just the most incredible journey. And so I pray that they're relieved and that he is relieved now. He did everything he could, and fortunately God gave him the resources to have people who could stay with her. When he just retired. He's almost 90. He just retired last year, and just alert and just a wonderful, wonderful man, a Christian man. Born and raised in Monterey. We've talked religion, and I think he went to a Presbyterian church back in Mexico, and his wife is having rosary and a mass at Seaside. But Dr. Avalos is just one of those strange, eclectic Christians that believes in God and just has a wonderful, intelligent. He's a perceptive. He reads a lot. He's just intelligent, and he would be my doctor except for the fact he's not in our assistant. He wasn't.
Yes.
Of course, now he's not practicing, so I can't use him. But I can't tell you how many times I go to him and I never get a bill. Or he's just a precious, precious friend. And I just heard from him, but I can't remember if the funeral and everything is Friday or Saturday this week. But that's happening, and so
We can
pray
look it
for
up
him.
online too.
Okay. If there's no others, we will go and we will lift these before God and place them in the most appropriate places for their life to be nurtured and cared for. God, we do thank you for the capacity to not only remember but to feel very connected to people that we have cherished and loved, and that we must turn over into your keeping, whether it be a grief experience or the tenderness of physical issues that are being worked out. Every circumstance, oh God, we bring them to you, knowing that you are far better at managing this than any physician we could hire or any words that we could speak. You are Father to us. You are their dad. You are the one that nurtures and protects them. And because of that, we gladly, joyously join your consciousness in lifting them before you, mirroring heaven's concern for them and knowing that you are steadfastly at work in each of these circumstances. God, thank you for being the God that you are. Revealed to us in Jesus Christ, in whose name I pray. Amen. All right, believe it or not, we are still in the book of Genesis.
Really?
Not for long, but we are still there. I thought we were going to get to the resolution of this great adventure between Joseph and his brothers, and he remains incognito, and they don't know who he is from Adam. And we left off last week at verse 15 of the 43rd chapter of Genesis, and I really want to begin with the 43rd, the 15th verse of the 43rd chapter to bracket what we're going to read tonight. It has gotten so bad back in Palestine that Jacob, Israel, has finally said, okay, you're going to kill me, but take Benjamin with you. We got to have some food. Go get us some food and bring it home. And boy, you better bring Benjamin back to me. I don't care if the rest of you die, but man, you better make sure Benjamin gets back to you. So the men took the present that they had prepared, which was classic Oriental behavior. Something that still happens oftentimes. Can't tell you how many times that we've, one of the beautiful ones that we would have Robert and Bernie over for Thanksgiving or something like that, and even though they were both alcoholics and couldn't drink, they'd come walking in with a big, beautiful bottle of Chardonnay for my wife, you know, because if you go visit somebody, you take a present. Well, I think probably the boys took something a little bit more elaborate than that, but we do have a list of things that they took, almonds and special resins and spices and things unique to the Palestinian landscape that was treasured, and they packaged it all up and took it with them. And they also took not only the money that they found in their sacks after they returned home, but they put the equal amount of money in there. So now they've got twice as much money to purchase grain for them, and they took Benjamin. And the end of verse 15 very simply says, they arose, went down to Egypt, and stood before Joseph. And then we turn to verse 16, and we get the rest of the story. It really is a story that takes the very last phrase of the verse 15, they stood before Joseph, and it fills out what it means for them to accomplish this audience. And so beginning in verse 16, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he called over his right-hand man, his steward of his house, and he told him, the steward said, now this is what I want you to do. I want you to bring the men into my home. I want you to slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon. That's very strange that he would go to that sort of lengths, because they came there strictly for a business deal. And all of a sudden, that steward is going to inform them that, I'm sorry, you're not going to get your grain up front. You've got to go eat with this guy. He's inviting you over to his house. And of course, the immediate thing that happened is in verse 17, the man did as Joseph bade him and brought them into Joseph's house. And the men, the brothers, were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they began to confer among themselves, you know, that this may be a real trick to get us in a place where we can't escape because of the money he thinks we stole, which was replaced in our sacks the first time that we are brought in. That's why he's going to have us at his home. He's fixing to call in his armed guards, and nobody's ever going to see us again, so that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us to make slaves of us all and seize our assets. And the word translated to fall upon us is really roll over on us. It's a very vivid expression of somebody who's just absolutely mashed into the dirt and doesn't have a finger that they can lift to reserve. So these men, through the steward, have been informed that they're going to eat in the house of this viceroy, this assistant to the Pharaoh, this big shot in all of Egypt, only second in command. The only thing that Joseph did not have rule over or any fingers in was the meals that the Pharaoh ate. That's the one thing that he didn't have anything to do with. So the Pharaoh had a man who stood beside him and always had to take a bite first to make sure somebody wasn't trying to poison him. And his own private cooks prepared his meals, and it was prepared especially for the Pharaoh. But after that, everything from that meal preparation and eating of the meal, everything else in the kingdom belonged to Joseph and what he said. And so these guys are hearing this big shot calling him into this big opulent palace, and they're thinking, this is a trap. He's going to call us in there, and he's going to roll over on us. Nobody's going to ever hear from us again. They won't even, even the newspaper people won't be able to follow where we went, because he took us behind closed doors, and nobody will ever know. It was kind of like was it Khashoggi, the Washington Post guy that was
Invited into the embassy,
invited into
Saudi embassy in
Saudi,
Turkey.
over there, and was piecemeal cut up and taken in little Ziploc bags and buried throughout the country. Nobody ever saw or heard from him again. And we still don't know for sure what happened, except we know it did happen, and we have a suspicion that we know who made it happen. MDS, no, not MDS, MBS.
MBS, I think
Okay,
it is.
whatever. Anyway, so that's what they're afraid of. So verse 19, so they went up to the steward of the Joseph's house, and they began to console with him at the door of the house. And that expression at the door of the house isn't intended just to give you a location where this conversation happened. The expression of the door of the house in our contemporary situation would be in your office, a place where you conducted business. Was at the gate of a village or the door of a house. That's the place where you were still independent, but you were at a boundary of power or of negotiating, competing allegiances. And so the expression they went to the door of the house more than likely refers to a place where notary publics are signed, where decrees are signed, where deeds are made. It's that place where business happens. And it's at the door of the house, and they began to tell this steward, this right-hand man of Joseph. And guys, I've read my Bible cover to cover, and what I'm fixing to read for you, I never saw. So I get to see it for the first time with you, because they say to him, they began to plead their case with him. Please don't take us and kill us. We really are exactly who we said we are. We just 11 boys of an old man back in Palestine, and we're not spies, and we didn't come to do any damage, and I don't know how that gold got back into our bags. We didn't steal it. We paid for that stuff, and how it ended up there, we don't know, but I know he's thinking we're stealing and conniving and, playing under the table or something. So they say, oh my Lord, we came down the first time to buy food, and when we came to the lodging place after we left, we opened our sacks, and there was every man's money in the mouth of his sack. And again, between the Yankee version and the Southern version, the Southern story uses a word in the Hebrew that really looks like shack, looks like sack, whereas the Northern tradition uses a longer word that also means a sack or some sort of container. And but this is that simple word, that sack. We opened our sacks and our money in full weight, so we have brought it in again with us. We have left it in the sack. It's back here. It's the same money we brought to you the first time. One of the things I learned, I love doing Bible study because God's always let me see something I've never seen before. But one of the common expressions for a common coin was shekel. The word shekel comes from a Hebrew root word that means weight. And what we do know, in fact, there are still some Near Eastern countries who negotiate currency by the weight of the gold or the weight of the silver, the weight of whatever coins they have. We have, okay, that's a dime, that's a nickel, that's a penny, that's a dollar. Ours is marked, and we know exactly how it relates to the other coins or the other soft bills in our pocket. But in antiquity, in the earliest times, money was weighed. And so if you bought gold, it was weighed, and so it's going to be 5 shekels is what it's going to cost you. Well, a shekel is the Hebrew word at the root, which means to weigh. And so, it says our money in full weight. At that time, that's how they valued the currency and the worth of the money that was deposited and given for the grain that they took. So we have brought it back with us. And we have brought other money down in our hand to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. And this next sentence is the one that I have never seen before. It just, my pea-picking brain just doesn't see it that way. This steward, this Egyptian, right-hand man of Joseph, says to them, "Rest assured, don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father must have put treasure in your sacks for you, because I got your money and negated your bill of sale. I got your money. If there's money back in your sack, then it must have been that God put it back there." Now, this guy knows that he's lying through his teeth, because you read earlier at the end of chapter 42, Joseph tells his steward, "Now you sneak in there and you put their money back in their sacks before they head out, and you pack it up and you give them enough portions so they don't even have to open their sacks until they get back home." And the Yankee tradition has them opening their sacks when they get home and finding the money. But the Southern tradition has them opening their sacks, like they're saying here, on their first night's journey and finding the money in there, and they're terrorized and they can't sleep well at night or anything else. But your God has put your money back in your sacks, the treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money. And then he immediately brought out Simeon out to them. And when the man had brought the men into Joseph's house and given them water, they had washed their feet. When they had given their asses provender, they made ready the present for Joseph coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. So they got prettied up. They washed their feet. Okay, I know that that's not part of your anatomy that you worry about when you go out to eat, to make sure your feet are washed, because you put shoes on. And if you're a woman, you put on really brightly colored shoes or real weird looking shoes, something that
Or
really
well
draws
worn.
attention. Or if you're my wife, you wear the most comfortable shoes you can find, so it doesn't matter what they look like. And but it's but if you're going to go eat with someone, you washed your feet. You remember Jesus at the Last Supper, and the part of the body he washed was their feet. And I don't know all the symbolism of that in terms of antiquity and eating meals, but they washed their feet, they fed their donkeys, and then they repackaged or put bowls on the presents that they had brought to deliver to Joseph when they came to eat with him at noon. So they were getting ready. Now remember, we started at verse 15 where they stood before Joseph. Everything that you and I have read now from 16 to 25 is what went on in showing up. Joseph has seen them from afar. He sees Benjamin with them, and then he plans this meeting that's going to be in his house at noontime, because he's got to go back to work and do some other kinds of stuff. And so at verse 26, we pick up the story when Joseph finally comes home and the brothers are waiting for him. Verse 26, when Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present which they had with them, and bowed down before him to the ground. And he began to inquire about their welfare. And he said, "Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" Now, on one level, this may sound like interrogation, but if you read this kind of in the natural storytelling vein, this is just common courtesy. I don't know about you, but when you get with somebody you haven't seen in a while, how you doing? Got any aches and pains? How's your wife?
How your mama and them?
How's your mom and them? How's your kids? That's I don't know how interested you are in that kind of conversation. It's kind of like when we go home and we see our grandkids. I mean, that's just boring conversation for me to have. But I always get the earful of it from my wife, and she talks about how the kids are doing the funny things that they did, and I'm ready to go play golf, and I got to listen to this, grandkid stuff. But that's all Joseph is really doing. He's making chit chat. He's kind of conversing, and yet because we know he is a man who has not seen his father, and he knows it's been 20, 30 some odd years. Well, it's been about 20 years. If he was sold into slavery at 17, he's now 37 to 40. So it's been 20 years, and Jacob was an old man by that time. As many kids as he had, his lucky he hadn't died before then. And so he begins to inquire how his dad is doing. And they said to him, "Your servant, our father, is well, he is still alive. And again they bowed their heads and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes, and he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said to Benjamin, as he says to really the other brothers, is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? And I think by this time they're nodding. And so Joseph gives a blessing to Benjamin. He says to him, God be gracious to you, my son. Then Joseph made haste, because by this time he's had enough conversation with his brothers and with Benjamin. He runs out of the room, for his heart yearned for his brother. And he had to go find a secret place where he could just burst into tears and just cry his heart out and weep. And then finally he entered his chamber back there and wept there. Then he washed his face, came out, controlling himself. He said, okay, it's time to eat. Everybody take their places. And the way they would eat in ancient time is that Joseph would be seated, and he did sit at a table, a small table, and we have some archaeological representations of that, in a little table at one end of the room. And then facing him were two groups of people in this instance. There were the Egyptians who were his attendants, who sat at a table by themselves. It was an obscenity, and it was considered sacrilegious and an unholy thing for them to sit at table with Jews, with foreigners, with non-Egyptian people. They had to practice that kind of abstinence from contact with food that was being shared on this common table. And so those Egyptians sat by themselves, because that they were forbidden to eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And so they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. How did we get seated like this? And the mystery is, was this just accident? Or is this something God pulled off? They're looking at each other. They're sitting at a third table by themselves, and they're seated in order of age, with the youngest at one end and the eldest, Simeon, at the other end. Or maybe Reuben is older than Simeon. And they look at each other with amazement. They don't understand, how has this arrangement happened? And to the writers and the storytellers' credit, they don't give us the answer. You let your imagination go. How do you think they ended up that way? Could God be very much a part of this period of reconciliation? And then the last verse that we're looking at tonight. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. Now, the commentaries that I consulted with this says that number 5 times, 5 hands is really the literal Hebrew word here. Could be a kind of euphemism for a recognizably larger portion. But by this time, Benjamin, even though he sounds to be like a young 12 or 13-year-old, he couldn't have been any more than like 5 years younger than Joseph. So he's in his 30s, early 30s maybe, but he's the youngest. And everybody notices that, okay, he got 2 lobster pieces, and he got a bigger piece of prime rib, and and his shrimp cocktails got 12 around the rim instead of 6, and it was an ostentatious demonstration that the youngest, because of Joseph's own incredible joy to see his baby brother, the brother that is from the womb of his mother, his full brother, sitting there. And so they began to eat and drink. They drank and were merry with him. And really, in the Hebrew language, they just got drunk. But not in a kind of debauchery. That sense of getting drunk, the sense of being merry, is really an expression of a kindness and a not a frivolity, but I mean, they didn't care if he got more food than they did. Everybody's just happy to be there. they can't, and they haven't put two and two together yet. They haven't realized we came in here terrorized. Number one, we're sheep herders. We don't know whether the fork's supposed to be on the left or the right. Have you ever been in that kind of circumstance where you're sitting at a formal banquet in a big hotsy-totsy, uppity kind of thing, and there's more silverware than you could eat in a lifetime, There's 2 or 3 kinds of forks on one side and 2 or 3 kinds of spoons on the other side, 2 knives on the other side. All I need is 1 fork and 1 knife and maybe 1 spoon to serve my tea. What else do I need this stuff with? To my chagrin, I learned late in life that, well, some of those forks are for salads and some of them are for meats and some of them are for, whatever. And you got a butter knife and you got a regular steak knife and you got spoons for tea as well as for soups as well as for, hey, one soup spoon will do me good. So I can just imagine these old farm hicks going into his house, terrorized about maybe violating Emily Post's instructions, but even scareder that we're being taken to a place that common ordinary people didn't get taken to. There's got to be something up with this guy. But by the end of the evening, they don't care. They are happy. They are feeling extremely blessed and fortunate to be there. They really are gotta be. The storyteller is setting us up for chapter 44, where Joseph finally reveals himself, and there's an incredible moment of drama where he chases them down as they leave in town and finds a cup in their sacks and accuses them all anything to get them back. And that's going to be the continuation of the story. I'm not going to leave that. I am not going to ruin that for you. There was a part of this story, and I haven't been following my notes, that I can't find it. I'm so disappointed because there is a moment in the New Testament story of Jesus that exactly parallels a part of this story. No, that's something else. Okay, here's my reflection on this Bible story before I turn you loose. One of the clinical terms that we use when we are dealing with people who have very strong emotional issues from childhood or from young adult life or whatever else, we call them anchors. Anchor is something in your life or in your field of awareness that once it is touched, it triggers a whole boatload of emotions and memories. An anchor is something, I remember before I learned what an anchor was, an experience I had when I first came to Corpus Christi to pastor my first church here. And there was a man who, and in case you haven't observed it yet, one of God's healing gifts of my own spiritual journey has been to return to me the gift of embrace, the gift of touch, the gift of hug. I was very standoffish until I went through a real transformation, spiritual experience at my walk to Emmaus. I was proper, but and I had learned through some small group experiences to know that touch. I had learned that while I was doing my PhD, that one of the novel things that was being taught in medical school was that if a physician walked into a room, even though he really didn't need to test the pulse of the patient or anything else, he could really just observe the instruments that were attached to that patient. They have been trained to go in and touch the patient, to put their hand on them, even if they are faking taking their pulse or whatever. That touch is so redemptive and so healing and so connecting between two people. And so I kind of had learned that, and so it's been my experience for some time that, especially when I came to Corpus, that if I was walking around a parishioner, I'd pat him on the back or whatever else. And there was a faithful church member at my first church here in Corpus Christi. He and his wife, and they always sat near the back. And one Sunday morning, I'm walking by him, I reach over and I pat him on the back, and he flinches, and he almost hits me. And it scared me. And so after services were finished, I approached him. I said, I triggered in you something that scared me and that evidently frightens you, you know, and I apologize. What happened? You know, what did I do? Because I wasn't even aware the way I touched his back was of significance. And he told me, he said, when he was a child, he had an alcoholic father who would find he and his brothers playing, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, his daddy would take a switch and just whack him across the back. That his back was an anchor to memories and to responses that were terrorizing to him. I didn't know that. I gave him a pat of love and respect, but I triggered in him an anchor that caused an incredibly visible and visceral reaction. Well, here's a story about brothers who have come across an anchor, and what it dawned on me was that this fear that they have of going into this palace and eating with this viceroy is connected, in my opinion, to the possibility that their shame, their nagging shame at what they did to their brother that's missing and they presume dead, their attitude towards Joseph was triggered by a sleeve, a coat. It's generally translated of many colors, but that description of that coat is really the coat of long sleeves. It is the description of a clothing outer garment that was worn by white-collar workers. And so here comes Joseph in his long-sleeved outfit to see his brothers out in the fields, and they got their short sleeves on and they're rolled up and they're working like crazy and sweating and everything. And here comes this boy, you know, with his suit and tie on out to see how his brothers are doing and take a report back from his dad. And it really made him mad. And so that memory of what drove them crazy to get rid and kill their brother must have a parallel in this experience of going into a palace. These sheep herders, these common laborers, these unsophisticated men, going into a place that's literally bedazzled with refinement and with white collar sophistry and things that, you know, utensils that they were not familiar with, and eating arrangements that they were not familiar with, and you know, and they may not have consciously remembered, but boy, that old anchor of remembering, of inside of them recognizing that their fear and their anger was triggered by the jacket that Jacob had given Joseph out of his love and respect for him to wear in front of them. Here they are, and it's almost reverse. He's still wearing the long sleeve coat, and they are outsiders, and they're scared because now that guy with the long sleeves on has got the power, and they are vulnerable, and they are at risk, and finally God is going to get even. He is going to exact justice that they have been avoiding like crazy. Anchors are one of those things that we need to be aware of in our own life. And so if you have a sudden response, for me an anchor is the smell of roses. It triggers in me, the smell of roses triggers in me not depression, but just a kind of sadness. And I never, you know, because women love roses, right? Yeah, but my funeral experience, over and over and over again, that's the smell of being at a funeral. And it took me years to figure out, why do I not like the smell of roses? Because it's an anchor of memories and of experiences. They're not particular or specific. It's that overwhelming sense of presence, of being in grief and being in a situation where, as a minister, I'm to do something to heal or to bring comfort, and it's scary. I am fraught with anxiety, and it's not a comfortable thing for me to be with, and yet especially if it's a church member, I don't want anybody else burying them. I love them, and as painful as it is for me, I want to be the one who is there, sharing the grief of the family and of my church family, to do that. And yet, the smell of roses is one of those anchors that is not pleasant. It's not something that makes me feel romantic or makes me feel like, oh boy, what a gift I can give, you know. It's just, you know, I'll give you a thorn before I give you a rose, so, you know, so I can enjoy the scraping it's going to do on you. But anchors are very important, so be aware if there's something that you smell or something that you see or hear and you respond in a very visceral way, that may be God awakening you a piece of your life that He's ready to heal, or He's ready to simply let you in on so that you no longer are deeply triggered by that. Now I can intentionally give somebody roses and smell them, and I can smell them sweet, and some of that sense of grief or sense of oppressiveness is not as visible and visual and visceral for me as it used to be, because I've looked at that, I've faced it, I know where it comes from, I know what it means, and now I can take it back, I can rob it of its power over me to a small degree. And so it's important. That may be one of the places where God is sort of bringing you to confront or to be a part of your healing journey of being saved and continue being healed, because God loves you so much He's never going to leave you where He found you. And that's one of the great promises that we have. Okay, let me dismiss you. Thank goodness Gwen's not here to remind me that I'm 5 minutes over, so
You are.
y'all will remind
Bill
me,
will,
won't you?
Bill will remind me.
Yeah, Gwen's probably texted me. She's probably said, I'm already asleep. Who cares what time you go? So I'll pray and dismiss you. And glad to have been home. You had a great time up at College Station and survived it.
Yeah.
But with 2 students, but had some rain up there and everything. But it was a good trip. So it was a good time. with the students.
Informational conference.
Good informational conference. So that was good. Proud of you, man. Proud of you. Okay, let's pray. God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for memories that we have and experiences that are difficult and joyous. God, thank you that we are complete people, that we not only have our memories, but we have those senses that can be awakened and treasured and gifted as we give ourselves to each other and love each other and care for each other and pray for each other. God, thank you for the wealth and the depth of our human personality and the richness of that, and how we can engage and increasingly share together from the depth of who we are, because you're the one who sees us through and through. You know every part about us, and you invite us to join you in the healing journey. God, thank you for loving us so completely, so unreservedly. I give into your keeping my brothers and sisters for their journeys home and for the rest of their week as we prepare to meet you in worship or in the places that we work. God, continue to make us a blessing to each other and to the world. For it is in the name of the blessing that we have received most precious. His name is Jesus. I pray. Amen. Blessings on you. You just misled. Have fun. And you can turn off the video machine.